Hello and welcome to News Central TV. I am Adebola Adeduba. Here are stories making the rounds beyond the continent. We begin the news in Europe, where Russia's President Vladimir Putin has landed in North Korea in a rare visit to the reclusive communist state as he seeks support from the leader Kim Jong-un in his war against Ukraine. Putin's two-day visit, his first to North Korea in 24 years, comes as North Korean soldiers briefly crossed the heavily fortified border between North and South Korea for the second time this month, drawing warning shots from South Korean soldiers. In a letter published on Tuesday, Putin expressed appreciation for North Korea's support in what he calls Russia's special military operation in Ukraine. He said he would in turn support North Korea's efforts to defend its interests in the face of what he called decades of U.S. economic pressure, provocation, blackmail, and military threats. And joining me on the news to talk about this is an international policy expert, Leonard Anyogo. Good evening, glad to have you join me.
Good evening, thank you for having me.
Now, how do you think Putin's visit to North Korea, amidst these ongoing conflicts, affects the war in Ukraine?
Well, you know that President Putin of Russia has been isolated from the West, from other global power, especially his war, his adventure in Ukraine. And so he's seeking a new partnership, and North Korea comes readily in hand for him to do that partnership. So having been isolated, he has to, I think it's a survival strategy because he's under severe sanctions. And then, of course, you also recall that his assets, the Russian assets, are now being sold, and the interest thereof, up to 50 billion US dollars, is to be used to fund the Ukrainian defense forces. So he is seeking a new partnership, though he's been there. Historically, you know that Russia and the West have had those loggerheads. So I see this visit as a kind of survival strategy for the Russian Federation, being isolated from the international community.
Now, you talked about, the visit being a survival strategy and also laid allegiance to the $50 billion, funds, for Russia frozen, in assets in the U.S. market. What are the potential implications of Putin's visit, for instance, on regional stability, considering North Korea's recent provocative actions at the border with South Korea?
Of course, the West will be sitting on an edge, given the person of Putin is being an isolated figure over time. So the West is looking at that visit with very critical view, knowing that they won't allow that kind of partnership to come to any kind of fruition because the West feel threatened. Now, of course, you now know that, okay, after even that visit, there's even a plan for him to go to Vietnam. These are all those extremist countries, in quotes, if you want to define them as such, where they don't align with the Western ideology. So Putin is seeking new friendship, a new survival strategy, just like I earlier on stated. Now, the West will be looking very critically at such adventure. And so, of course, it's going to heighten tension generally because the South Korea is on an edge right now as we speak to see what could come out of those kind of partnership. Of course, those kind of partnership is never and will never be in the interest or expectation of the Western world. So they will be looking very critically at those kind of meetings and negotiations that's ongoing between Putin and North Korea. I know that North Korea too has been on the pariah state. In fact, this one visit is one. This is one visit apart from China. The Chinese president has visited. No, I don't think any other country has visited North Korea in recent times. So North Korea and Russia at the moment, you can say that they are partners that have been isolated internationally. So that kind of partnership will be looked very critically and be watched very critically by the Western
Just to come in
world.
there, yes, Mr. Ayogo, you talked about, Putin looking for alliances, seeking international alliances, among other countries. But then beyond alliances, what other specific objectives, is Putin likely to pursue during his visit to North Korea, and how much that objective align or even conflict with Russia's interests in other parts of the world?
Well, you know, just like I earlier said, Russia is under severe sanctions. So it gets to a point that what I would like about Russia is also a war power, but they are under severe sanctions. And the sanctions are telling on the Russian Federation. Now, recall that Russia is even having a kind of partnership and alliance with Iran. So there have been accusations that Iran has supplied Russia with some weapons that are being used for the Ukrainian war. So you now see that it's a kind of desperation. Russia is going towards Iran, North Korea, Vietnam. These are countries traditionally that is being watched by the Western world. And of course, okay, if we want to come to the African continent, you know, Russia is trying to even enter into a kind of alliance or influence in Burkina Faso and some of those countries that are under military rule. You know, so these are issues that the Western world is watching keenly. Of course, globally, it's not being divided between Russia and the rest of the world. So
now, just to chip in there, you know, in view of, you talked about Western community, I was just wondering, in view of Putin's visit, what should be the disposition of the international community in the light of this?
Of course, already they have sanctions in place. Of course, I'm sure that they're going to increase those sanctions. And of course, be more alert. Of course, you know that in the NATO summit and the G7 summit recently, that said that, look, Ukraine should not be allowed to fall to Russian aggression. So these issues are issues that are on the top burner right now. I'm sure that the US president and the G7, other G7 leaders are not sleeping at all. And then, of course, NATO too. So it's a call for concern. And we are praying that this event that is happening very rapidly will not escalate into a very major world confrontation, because it's now being divided between the West and the Russian allies. And of course, you know, that is going to spark a lot of instability in the world. Then, of course, the one that interests us is even the Russian influence in the African continent. You know, some of these African countries are now tilting towards Russia for assistance, especially those countries under military regime. That is a call for concern. Definitely Russia can survive with some of these sanctions, but it's telling on them. And so they are even looking for allies in the African continent. You know, so these are issues that are challenging the security intelligence globally.
Well, thank you so much for your time on the news. We do have our ears and eyes on the ground to see how things pan out. Hopefully things does not degenerate. Thank you so much for your time on the news. Leonard Anyogo, international policy expert. Thank you once again.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
In the meantime, Kyiv has accused Russian forces of beheading the Ukrainian servicemen in the eastern Donetsk region, the latest allegation of abuse levied by Ukrainian prosecutors against Moscow. According to the Office of Ukraine's Prosecutor General on social media, the Ukrainian military found a damaged armored vehicle belonging to the Ukrainian Defense Forces while conducting aerial reconnaissance at one of the combat areas in the Donetsk region. The decapitated head of a Ukrainian defender was found within. Let's also tell you that U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Tuesday condemned China's support for Russia's defense industry, saying it is prolonging the Ukraine war and has to stop. Blinken, in a joint news conference with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, said China is providing critical support that enables Russia to keep that defense industrial base going. Stoltenberg also reiterated his comments from the previous day, threatening China with consequences if it continues to support Russia.
Supplied by China, as President Biden's made clear, we have a real concern not with weapons being supplied by China to Russia. That's not what they're doing. What they are doing, as you've heard me discuss many times, is providing critical support to Russia's defense industrial base. Some 70% of the machine tools that Russia's importing are coming from China. 90% of the microelectronics coming from China, and that has enabled Russia to keep that defense industrial base going, to keep the war machine going, to keep the war going. So that has to stop.
Away from that, at least 17 people have died and 60 more missing, including many children after two ships were wrecked off the coast of southern Italy. A rescue ship run by German aid group picked up 51 people thought to be migrants from a sinking wooden vessel in the first of two shipwrecks. Officials say 2 of 51 were unconscious and had to be cut free with an axe, and that's 10 bodies were found trapped on the wooden ship's flooded lower deck near the Italian island of Lampedusa. In the meantime, the survivors have been handed over to the Italian Coast Guard and taken ashore. You're live with News Central Television. Let's take a short break. Stay with us. In North America, U.S. President Joe Biden is set to announce a new policy that would protect hundreds of thousands of undocumented spouses of U.S. citizens from deportation. The action will apply to those who have been in the country for at least 10 years and will allow them to work in the U.S. legally. This marks the most significant relief program for undocumented migrants already in the U.S. since the Obama administration announced a deferred action for childhood arrivals in 2012. The White House believes more than 500,000 spouses of U.S. citizens will benefit, in addition to 50,000 young people under 21 whose parents is married to an American citizen. Meanwhile, in South America, the government of Peru said it would investigate sex abuse allegations leveled by hundreds of indigenous children against teachers in a jungle region of the South American country. A total of 524 cases of rape and abuse dating as far back as 2010 have been reported by girls and boys from the Haunj indigenous group who attended public schools in the province in Peru's north. The alleged crimes at school residences were revealed last month by Rosemary Pioch, representative of an Haunj Women's Association. The announcement of an investigation came after two government ministers provoked widespread anger by equating the alleged abuse with cultural practices.
Bueno, con relación a los hechos, yo he sido absolutamente enfático en decir que desde el Poder Ejecutivo rechazamos de manera categórica cualquier tipo de abuso sexual contra las niñas, niños o adolescentes. Se tienen que realizar las investigaciones que correspondan a fin de determinar la responsabilidad de los presuntos autores de estos hechos. Y en su momento, por supuesto, brindar atención a las niñas, niños y adolescentes que hayan sido afectados por estos hechos. Aquellas víctimas de estos hechos van a tener que recibir atención integral para protegerlas, en primer lugar, por la afectación psicológica que hayan podido padecer y en segundo lugar, también a la afectación a la salud si han sido contagiadas con el virus del VIH.
Let's head to Middle East, where we understand that Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says it is inconceivable that the U.S. had been withholding weapons and ammunition to Israel, adding that the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken assured him during the last visit to the Middle East that the administration is working day and night to remove those bottlenecks.
Weapons and when Secretary Blinken was recently here in Israel, we had a candid conversation. I said I deeply appreciated the support the U.S. has given Israel from the beginning of the war. But I also said something else. I said it's inconceivable that in the past few months, the administration has been withholding weapons and ammunition to Israel. Israel, America's closest ally, fighting for its life, fighting against Iran and our other common enemies. Secretary Blinken assured me that the administration is working day and night to remove these bottlenecks. I certainly hope that's the case. It should be the case. During World War II, Churchill told the United States, give us the tools, we'll do the job. And I say, give us the tools and we'll finish the job a lot faster.
Thousands of Israelis protested against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government over the Gaza war and failure to negotiate the release of scores of hostages still held in the Palestinian territory. Protests against Netanyahu's handling of the war against Hamas militants have gathered pace, with tens of thousands taking to the streets of Israel's biggest city, Tel Aviv, every weekend. Protesters traveled to Jerusalem to rally outside the Israeli parliament, and Netanyahu's residents clashing with police and urging new elections as part of what he has been dubbed a week of disturbance by activists. Israeli police said 9 people were arrested, some of them in connection with violence that left police officers. Armed with drums, horns and placards calling for fresh elections, thousands of protesters, old and young, called for a ceasefire to bring the remaining Gaza hostages home. Staying in the Middle East, U.S. envoy Amos Hochstein has called for the urgent de-escalation of the exchanges of fire between Lebanon's Hezbollah and Israeli forces that have been raging since the start of the war in Gaza. According to the presidential envoy, who is on a visit to Beirut, the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah has gone on far too long, adding that it is in everyone's interest to resolve it quickly and diplomatically. Last week, the power through Iran-backed Hezbollah movement, an ally of the Palestinian militant group Hamas, stepped up attacks on northern Israel after an Israeli strike killed one of its senior commanders.
Eid Mubarak, everybody. Thank you for coming out on a holiday. But this holiday comes at a difficult time. And it's not just a difficult time, it's a critical moment in time. It's why the President asked me to come to Lebanon today. Speaker Berry and I had a very good discussion. We discussed the current security and political situation in Lebanon, as well as the deal on the table right now with respect to Gaza, which also provides an opportunity to end the conflict across the blue line. A ceasefire in Gaza and/or an alternative diplomatic solution could also bring the conflict across the blue line to an end, creating conditions for displaced Lebanese civilians to go home in the south and for Israeli civilians to go home in their north.
You're watching Beyond the Continent. Let's take a short break. Stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. In Asia, China's Foreign Ministry spokesman Lin Jian said he was not aware of the actions of 2 Chinese diplomats in Australia, adding that the visit of Chinese Premier Lin Xiang was held smoothly and achieved positive result. This comes after Australia expressed worry on Tuesday at the clumsy behavior of 2 Chinese ambassadors during the press conference, marring a much heralded visit during which Premier Li Xiang aimed to promote friendship and trade. China's second most powerful man has posed in front of giant pandas, warmly toasted Australian wine, and highlighted the need to peacefully work through differences during his rare trip to Australia.
我不了解你提到的具体情况，但是我可以告诉你的是，据我了解，第9次中澳总理的年度会晤的各项活动顺利举行，取得了积极成果。
And more than a dozen people were on Tuesday confirmed missing in China after heavy rains and flooding struck swathes of the south as the north saw some of the warmest temperatures of the year. Officials report that 4 people were unaccounted for after a flash flood in Shanxi in the northwestern region of Xinjiang, where torrential rains triggered landslides and clogged roads. Landslide in Mehu in southern Guangdong province on Monday killed 5, left 15 missing, and another 13 trapped by early the next morning. Footage from state broadcaster CCTV showed upturned cars and damaged buildings near Mehu, with residents in rubber boots peeking through muddy, debris-laden streets to salvage their belongings.
我们就镇上已经调配了一艘橡皮艇给我们，就是用于救援工作。其他方面救生衣、救生圈我们也准备了有。群众的那个。
Members of the LGBTQ community, activists and supporters celebrate as Thailand on Tuesday became the first country in Southeast Asia to legalize same-sex marriage in a historic parliamentary vote hailed as a victory by campaigners. The upper house Senate gave final approval by 130 votes to 4, with 18 abstentions to changes to the marriage law allowing same-sex couples to tie the knot. The new legislation will now go to King Maha for royal assent and come into force 120 days after publication in the official Royal Gazette. And that's all on Beyond the Continent. Send your eyewitness report to the WhatsApp number on the screen and do follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. You can watch us live on DSTV channel 422, Star Times channel 274, Avo TV and YouTube. Many thanks for watching. I am Adebola Adedugba. It's bye for now.